Exhaust. With turbos, a flash, and a good ignition system, you'll be getting into the low 500s here. And at this point, the exhaust is becoming a bit of an issue. We'll clear the path with our amazing sounding high-flow X-Pipe and be able to run you up to the limit of the fuel injectors another 20 to 30 horsepower later. Why stop here when you're just starting to have some fun and there's so much more potential to unlock? Fuel system. Next, we could throw a 5-bar fuel pressure regulator in there for another 12 to 15% more flow and be good for a short while, but to not have to revisit the injectors again, we'd recommend grabbing a set of 60-pound injectors during your next visit to our web store and drop them in with the appropriate tune. Fuel injectors. With the 60-pound injectors, we'd like to gain a bit of flexibility in the tuning and install a GReddy Profec Boost Controller or whatever your favorite flavor EVC may be. This gives you adjustable boost to take advantage of the times you can use more boost with good fuels, or have to turn it down due to poor fuel or road conditions. With the 60-pound injector and boost controller package, we also add our mass flow expansion network to the package to enable the ECU to see beyond the typical limits of the OEM MAF and mapping. With the MAF network, we're compressing the full range of 8 volts down into the 5 volt readable range that ECU can see and are able to map using the OEM MAF out into the mid to high 700 wheel horsepower range. Clutch. With newfound power and torque capability, with all the fun bits we've just installed, you'll be slipping the clutch and be needing a clutch upgrade to get beyond this point. You can choose a SOX pressure plate upgrade, maybe add a lightweight flywheel to this, or go further and not have to revisit this by installing our dual clutch upgrade now. All good choices at this level of performance, but the SOX will start slipping again over 600 foot-pounds, where our dual clutch is able to handle double that and more. Intercooling. How good is the stock intercooler on a Porsche 993 Turbo? Well, the stock intercooler on a 993 Turbo is leaps and bounds improved over the 930 Turbo or even a 964 Turbo. There's still room for improvement. Although lifting the lid on a 993 Turbo, you might say, where the heck would you put a bigger intercooler? Well, believe it or not, we are able to increase the core area from 500 cubic inches to a whopping 1,050 cubic inches. How can we fit that much intercooling in there when it already looks crammed? A popular solution is to recore the original intercooler by removing the OEM cores and replacing them with thicker cores. This works well and can increase the cores to 600 cubic inches with a 3-inch versus 2.5-inch core. Our solution is to change the flow path from the original side to center, requiring a center plenum and side plenums between the cores, which takes up a lot of core space, to a rear to front flowing style that fully optimizes the space available. That, as well as removing a layer of grill within the tail for more height and less restrictive airflow to your now massive intercooler. With all this newfound power you're producing, the OEM intercooler has gone from nice to pretty inadequate, which makes an intercooler upgrade quite necessary around this power level. Methanol injection. Meth injection can be magic on these cars. Since the 993 Turbo is air-cooled, producing a lot of power creates a lot of heat. And if you're not running E85, meth injection can help you. It will not only raise the octane of the fuel mixture, but also cool the heated, compressed air back down to ambient or below. Meth injection can be used in addition to good intercooling, or sometimes as an alternative. A stock intercooler with meth injection can perform very well. But remember, the intercooler not only has to cool the air, but also flow the air. And as the power levels increase, so does the airflow requirements. And doubling the volume of the intercooler not only improves the temperature reduction, but also improves the cross-sectional area, which will dramatically improve the flow and reduce the pressure drop across the cores. Using the back to front flowing cores, we're able to take advantage of the 105 square inches of core area to flow across versus the OEM intercooler flowing sides inward, having only 50 square inches of core area to flow across. That alone can also help reduce your intake air temperatures, since the compressors aren't having to overcome a huge pressure drop across the cores. So always be sure to consider all the factors for cooling and flow when making good decisions on an upgrade path. What's the limit of bolt-on mods for a 993 Turbo? Outside of modding the rest of the car for lightweight seats, brakes, suspensions, wheels, and tires, we're about at the limit of the bolt-on engine mods here. This is usually somewhere in the mid-500s, since these engines tend to produce similar power to torque numbers with factory cams, ports, and intake. And the limit of the rods and head studs will be somewhere just north of this number. To keep your engine happy and healthy, we recommend staying at or below this level with bolt-on mods, or proceeding on below with internal mods to reliably increase your power levels. Connecting rods. Like the 996 and 997.1 Turbo, the rods are the next barrier you'll run into. Since the knock control on this DME isn't nearly as capable as the newer Bosch ME7A ECUs, the rods will fail somewhere in the high 500s to just about 600 foot-pound range. The failure point will be lower on 91 octane and higher on 93 octane. And running meth injection, race fuel, or E85 can increase the factor of safety for your rods by quite the high percentage by moving knock far away and keeping things much cooler. When your rods fail, they typically fail in a catastrophic way, destroying the case, oil pump, intermediate shaft, crankshaft, well, basically the whole short block and sometimes the cylinder head too. So let's prevent a catastrophe and throw some proto rods in there so we can have a ton of fun and not always be worried about them. Head sealing. Around the same point or just a little more will be the head seal. The heads will lift and torch out the head to liner seal. Keep in mind there are no head gaskets on a 993 Turbo. These rely on a precision machined surface of the cylinder head and the cylinder liner mated together to create a sealing surface. They do have a metal compression ring and a groove within the liner to help out the head seal a bit, but we're already 50% or more over the intended torque for this design. So as long as we have it down for rods, let's reinforce the cylinder heads by welding up the two thinner sides where the flame ring would cut through the upper fin and install a set of flame rings to hold everything together. These can be done on a 3.6 or 3-point upgrade at this point, with the 3.8s gaining a nice 5.5% in power over the 3.6s, while also picking up some boost response on low-end torque. This method was used in the early 935s, and you may have heard of Niro rings. These were made of a Niresist material that was very durable at high temps to keep the combustion where it should be. The Niro rings from the 935 tended to leak badly since they were such a different expansion rate from the aluminum. They had to be fit a bit loose to prevent cracking. They did keep the head sealing surface from torching itself out, but left a gooey mess between the heads and the liners. We've improved on this by using alloys with similar expansion rates to the heads and liners, so we're able to fit the heads and liners together so tightly that you'll typically need to hammer the heads off the liners when disassembling an engine with these flame rings. We feel this is a much nicer solution for high-powered street cars that aren't disassembled after each race or 40 to 50 hours top-end rebuild period like the GT3s. Head studs. You may be asking about head studs now since we're talking about head sealing. Well, the 993 Turbo has a nice head stud already with close to 190,000 KSI tensile and a torque angle method that puts them up at or above some of the aftermarket head stud torque recommendations for this engine. And trying to run massive head studs on an air-cooled engine create more problems than it solves. These air-cooled engines have tremendous temperature deltas, and being aluminum engines tend to have very high expansion rates. You may have already heard of the Dilivar head studs from the early 911s. Those were designed to closely match the expansion rate of the cylinder liners to maintain the correct torque on the head. If you run a head stud with a much lower expansion rate, like a typical chromoly steel commonly used, the head would be over-torqued during high temperatures, but then floppy loose when it cooled back down. And these repeated heat cycles would eventually loosen the fasteners. So while we're able to run huge head studs on the water-cooled engines that much better maintain their delta T's, the OEM head stud does a great job on the 993 Turbo, but they do need to be replaced. All that temperature does tend to fatigue them, and they're prone to cracking as they age. Where does the driveshaft fail? Depending on your driving style, the driveshaft can fail in the low to mid 500 foot-pound range or possibly a bit higher if you don't tend to launch the car. The rear spline that couples to the transmission is merely spot welded to the shaft that drives the front wheels. It doesn't fail with any hoo-ha, but is something you can feel when it fails. We've experienced the cars having an unusual vibration on decel, and that was the driveshaft causing it. It's pretty easy to check as well by jacking up the car, pulling the coupler access rubber plug, and peering into that area. When broken, you'll see the spot welds pulled from the spline, and the spline will be able to rotate within it. So be careful with mods around this level and consider a two-wheel drive conversion, since the driveshaft will have a hard time surviving above this point. Check-in. So we've covered a lot of things. Where does that put us? With the basic upgrades we've just listed, you'll be capable of running high 500 to low 600 wheel horsepower level. This puts us up nearly over 200 horsepower, since that original 408 horsepower was at the crank, or barely 360 wheel horsepower level for an apples-to-apples comparison of the current build. That's pretty fun, but there's still much more this platform is capable of. Let's explore that together.